And so the people that we have up here today, I mean, listening to everything, one thing I know is certainly there are a lot of frustrated parents at Parents Unite who are annoyed by some of what's going on in their children's schools. But if I know that on this panel we have teachers that I bet you wish were teaching your children, and I am sure that in order to solve the problems we're talking about, we have to have teachers with us. So with that being said, Charles gave us an introduction, but I'd like to add to that Paul taught upper school mathematics. Chris taught secondary English in both private and public schools in Colorado, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And Alka, Sehgal, Cuthbert taught secondary English in state schools in England, along with primary level supplemental schools for over 20 years. So Chris, I was going to start with you. You wrote an essay titled "We Are What We Teach," which is what this panel is named. Can you tell us about how that came about and what that consisted of?
Yeah, first of all, it's been wonderful to be here, and I can't tell you how grateful I am to be here, to learn from all of you, to know that there are other people who are asking questions that I had in much of my life. And that life began with a father who was a teacher. And a coach. This used to happen to me in class all the time, and I would say, kids, don't worry about it. I'm not having a heart attack. I just get emotional at times. And I watched him carefully. And I could see the joy and fulfillment he got in his work. And just a remarkable guy. So it was very natural for me to go from college. I left college, got out of college, and I went right into teaching and coaching, and it was there that I started moving around the country, and I taught at schools. These are all actually private, independent schools, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts. I was 29. And by that time, we'd had a child, and more were on the way. And I thought, well, maybe, since I've grown up in schools, it'd be a good idea for me to go outside of schools and find out about what's going on in the rest of the world. And I never stopped remembering the joy of teaching. And coaching. And so I kept reading. And I kept reading what was going on in independent schools. And it worried me. It really worried me. It sounded, and this is as simply as I can put it, it sounded to me, given the language and the tenor and the curriculum, like they were teaching kids to hate their country. And that's as simply as I can put it. And so I really was curious. I wanted to go back in and see if that was true. But, I was still running a company, and I thought, well, I got plenty of time. I'll do that at some juncture. And then 9/11 happened. And that really stopped me in my tracks. Because I was operating under the assumption that I had plenty of time. Well, what if I don't have any time? And 3 weeks later, I cleaned out my desk, I thanked my partners, and I just left. And I left with, I was 51, with no prospects. And then after some time, I in fact I was lucky enough to get a job at a large urban high school in the Boston area, 2,500 kids from 75 countries, quite a place. And I began to see what was there. And I was looking for signals. And so, because I'd been out for so long, I wanted to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could, because I've been out of schools for 21 years. So I was teaching juniors and seniors in English. I was walking down one corridor, and there was this poster up that said that there was a PhD professor coming in to speak to the junior class on nuclear proliferation. And I said, oh, I'm going, because I got to learn a lot. And so I sat in the back of this auditorium with 450 juniors and other teachers. And this guy walks out on the stage, this kind of scrambled hair and tattered clothes. And this was the PhD professor that was to be telling us about nuclear proliferation. It was completely incoherent what he was saying. And I don't remember anything that he said, except I remembered the last two sentences. He said, there is something in the American presidency that wants genocide. Last sentence. There's actually something in the American presidency that wants omnicide. I'd never seen that word before. Omnicide is the end of human existence. Well, that was my first clue about what was going on. I stayed there for 2 years. I really actually loved the kids at that school. It was wonderful. But then I went to an independent school in the suburban Boston area that I would describe as high pressure, high achievement, high expectation. I'm going to rocket forward now to the 2016 presidential election. Now, I was no fan of either candidate, to tell you the truth. But I walked into the schoolhouse the day after that, morning after that election, and there were clusters of teachers sobbing. And of course, the kids saw that, and there were clusters of kids sobbing, I mean, like hysterically. I mean, it was just wall-to-wall hysteria. And so the classes were canceled, and we had to have meetings and therapy sessions and hand-holding, and it was just like the world had come to an end. And I thought, this is absolutely nuts. So I decided, okay, that was when I said, I got to try to put some ideas on paper. And just to provide maybe a different point of view. And so I'm going to just read to you something that I wrote, which I have edited down. So it's only about 7 minutes, not too bad. But I sent it to the head of school in advance, requesting time for, we will always begin our days with morning assembly, which was a nice way. And we'd have all kinds of speakers that would come in. And so I sent it to the head of school in advance, and I sent it to other administrators. And I said, here's what I'd like to say in all-school assembly. Waited about 4 days, made an appointment to see the head of school, and I said, so when might I be able to do this? And she said, absolutely not. I was like, I mean, that really surprised me. And I said, really? She said, absolutely not. And then I wandered up and saw a couple of the other administrators who I'd sent it to, and they were all, of course, all on the same page. Well, then I was really stuck because I love the work. I love teaching and coaching. And advising kids. So I didn't want to leave. So I thought, okay, these are all new ideas. And so I'm just going to let them sit with these for a while, and then I'll kind of circle back, and maybe they'll say, well, you know, maybe that would be a good idea. Well, I did that for 3 years. And then I gave up. And then I retired. Thank God before COVID. Whew, that was really lucky. So again, this is just 7 minutes. And here's exactly what I wrote. Good morning. So you can pretend you're one of the students or a young teacher or whatever. At my age, and this takes a long time, I've learned that whenever I'm inclined to say something controversial, it's always good to preface my ideas with these words. I could be completely wrong. So for emphasis, I'll repeat. I could be completely wrong. But I have strong convictions. So here goes. Here's my thesis. At our school, like most schools, the sacred words are diversity and tolerance. However, on a wide range of important issues, there is almost no diversity of thought at these schools and little tolerance for different ideas, especially conservative ideas. This is the problem for our school and our country. We are what we teach. The morning after the presidential election, I walked into the schoolhouse and saw groups of teachers and students sobbing. And then I described what it was like to go to those meetings. The shock and tears I saw in so many signals our failure and an important problem that I hope we can address moving forward. For years, I'd guess at least 25 years, the media and too many of our schools have regularly, routinely, and intentionally defamed America as the dark force in the universe, too often described as the great polluter, imperialistic force, homophobic, racist, nativist, you know all the words. You have been required to listen to speakers who highlight America's failures, inadequacies, and injustices. Now just imagine if when your family gathered around the table for a meal, all you talked about was how unfair and corrupt your family and your ancestors were. What would happen to your family? In large measure, today's America is a product of a jaundiced, monolithic educational ideology. We are what we teach. For as long as I've been here, 14 years, our school, like many schools, has taught history thematically. And those themes are race, class, and gender. From the moment I heard those words, I wondered, is that it? Is America no more than race, class, and gender? In my view, that is a narrow, negative, and intentionally political agenda. Words have meaning, so here's a suggestion. What if for the next 20 years, we change those words to freedom, opportunity, and courage? Why not use those words to provide a different and positive view of our great country? We are what we teach. I always try my best to put myself in your shoes in assembly or in class. How would I respond to a repetitive litany of America's failings? I think I would be bored and angry, but I would also probably remain silent, fearing that to challenge the political agenda of the faculty might undermine my college recommendations and therefore my future. Our job as teachers is to encourage you to be curious and to have the courage to challenge accepted thought. We're supposed to teach you how to think, not what to think, and education is not supposed to be indoctrination. We're supposed to encourage you to explore a variety of views, not adhere to a narrow political doctrine, and if we fail to be curious, we will remain just another boring echo chamber that fails to stimulate and inform. No healthy school can be an enclave of like-minded people. We are what we teach. In the years ahead, all of you will need to lead your academic lives and be able to function in a world of fascinating and challenging diversity. You will need to navigate and successfully interact with all kinds of wonderful people. And some of those wonderful people will have some terrible ideas. In addition, you will run into some terrible people who have some brilliant ideas. You will not be allowed to dictate the terms of those encounters or have a timeout. We want you to succeed in that next world, but we also need to teach you that you will find no empathy tents, Play-Doh, or coloring books, which were offered to college people that were having a meltdown over the election. My worry is that if we teach you that the way to respond to difficulty, disagreement, and disappointment is to demand a safe space, we will have crippled you, rendering you unemployable. People who start businesses usually take out loans, sometimes massive loans, that includes me, and they don't have the time or inclination to listen to your every sensitivity. The truth that we're failing to teach you is that life is messy, difficult, and painful. And if we allow you to imagine that you can somehow remain innocent and isolated from adversity, you will wind up as weak and helpless as Holden Caulfield. Furthermore, by providing the phantom protection of safe spaces, we are encouraging your weakness, not your strength. You will be admired when you demonstrate your resilience in the face of adversity, challenge, and difficulty. These are the moments that teach us what we are made of and what we are made for. These are the struggles that form us, not comfort and safety. We are what we teach. The shock and awe I saw the day after our election was an important invitation to change. We are a good school, and we will become a greater school when we are more expansively curious about a wide range of issues, because you need to succeed after college, and the world you will enter will be dramatically different from college. When you're trying to survive and thrive in your chosen careers, you won't have the luxury of sitting around and wondering how the world needs to accommodate your agenda or respond to a microaggression that you've suffered. The worst thing we can teach you is to blame others for your problems and demand that they change. The best thing you can do is change yourself. Set realistic goals, and then realize the satisfaction of reaching those goals. These are attributes that signal maturity, growth, and accomplishment. If we encourage and embrace a much wider spectrum of ideas, we will become a more interesting, dynamic school, and will begin to get out of an academic rut and narrow political agenda that does not distinguish us. Thank you for your patience. I care about all of you, and you are the future of our great country. So I'll end with words that in my 14 years at this school, I have never heard said on this stage. I love America. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was lovely, and I love America too. I'm going to turn to Alka. Alka, you also, like Chris and I, taught English.
I did, yes.
And furthermore, I know that you've edited a book titled What Schools Should Teach. I think we have an image that we can project. There's been a great deal of discussion lately about the appropriateness of certain books in schools, in American schools for children. What are your thoughts on selecting literature for children?
Thank you, Bonnie. I think, okay, so you can tell from the title there's a normative aspect to this, should. What should schools teach? So in that sense, I kind of disagree slightly with some of the overall themes of the previous session, in that I don't think we can treat the question of curriculum knowledge as a kind of pick and mix thing. I think we need to make value judgments. I think we need to know why we're making the judgments we make, and I think we need to be able to explain them. So I think there are two components. I believe, agree totally with Chris. You formulated it so beautifully. I can say I love America, but I've only known it for 3 days. But what I know of it, I love. I love Britain, where I was brought up, and I love India, the country that I was born in. And instead of tussling over which should it be, on a recent visit to India, and I actually realised, you know, my home is just bigger than I thought it was. It's got many rooms in it, and I think we can fit that. But coming back to what I would like to focus on is the question of knowledge and selection, and particularly in relation to literature. So I think knowledge and values are often seen as separate. And we've been had a lot of focus on the values discussion, rightly, for obvious reasons. But I think what can be overlooked in this is that knowledge itself has a value, its own value, which is truth and truthfulness. And I think it has it has values in a second way, in that it's ethical or practical values, which are to do with it, which are those that are necessary to undertake the educational endeavour in a proper way, if you like. Courage, but more specifically intellectual courage, the kind of courage that, you know, encourages people to think without banisters, as Hannah Arendt once put it, to take risks, to know that there are worse things than failing or getting something wrong in life, It might be worse never to have tried or put forward your suggestion. Thank you so much. And I think as teachers, I think we need to really grasp this, and this is what our book tries to address. There is not all knowledge is the same, right? It's not all of a piece. We have experiential knowledge, we have intuitions, we have beliefs, and we have objective knowledge claims. And those objective knowledge claims have not, in the medieval monasteries, the truth would be validated by theology, by belief in God. Since the Enlightenment, and I think Kant probably expressed it most beautifully, it's human reason that underpins the truth claims of when we want somebody to believe what we're saying through logic, through reasoning, in the way Jason alluded to earlier this morning, then we need to understand the difference between formal knowledge and experiential knowledge. We need to know the language of the disciplines and what counts as criteria of truth in the disciplines, and they will differ. What counts the methods and the truth criteria in the sciences is very different to the social sciences, different to the humanities, and different to the arts. We need to know something about this, right? As teachers, knowledge is our tool of trade. We would never say to a doctor, go out and practice without knowing biology. Yet we say to millions of teachers, go and teach without not even recognizing what the word epistemology means. Right? That is a failure. Sure. That is a failure just as much as the kind of moral failures, the wider scale moral failures. I think so. We are what we teach, and I think we need to insist upon selection criteria that are educational. I think we're also why we teach. Our reasons for teaching what we teach are also part of our professional identity. Why, as an English teacher, would I say that Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice undoubtedly deserves a place on the curriculum, far more so than, say, Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta? I need to be able to explain that if somebody asks me. I'm not going to do it now, but if anyone wants to ask me, I can, but I can do it, right? Why, for example, would I choose James Baldwin over Audre Lorde? James Baldwin, funnily enough, is hardly ever mentioned on these lists of critical, diverse, inclusive writers, whereas Audre Lorde's The Master's Tools will never, I'm not going to try the accent, The Master's Tools will never dismantle the Master's house, has become like an easy mantra. And yet, just compare, I'm going to treat you to a quote from James Baldwin. Some of you may know it, but some of you may not. Compare Audre Lorde's to this from Baldwin. Perhaps the language was not my own because I had never attempted to use it, had only learned to imitate it. If this was so, then it might be made to bear the burden of my experience if I could find the stamina to challenge it and me to such a test. When James talked about generativeness yesterday, and that was a fake, closed-off generativeness, what we see in Baldwin is a really wonderful opening out of really profound questions. We see humility. We have words like might. Were it so, we have conditionals. We have the encapsulation of human possibility compared to Lorde's The Master's Tools will never dismantle the Master's house. Nothing but mean-spirited, destructive narrowness. So, Baldwin, not Lorde, on my curriculum. And I think if we cannot ask for and be prepared to give reasons for our educational reasons, not political reasons, for our judgments, then we shouldn't be educators. It's as simple as that. Somebody needs to take charge of education. They need to be able to be educated enough themselves to be able to give reasons and say to the teachers who are breaking these boundaries which define education every day, to say, no, get out, go and find another job. You can believe what you like. I'm a Democrat. and I like freedom. You believe what you like in your own time, but in schools you will educate, and if you can't do it, just get out. And what is an educational reason? Well, it's linked to the telos of education, to intentionally develop the abilities of our young to think more deeply and more widely and enrich the quality of thought that will then go back to society as a whole. Okay? So you can tell the quality of a culture, of a society, not by the percentage of grades that you get, top grades. You get it by looking at the quality of discourse. Look at how your politicians speak. Look at how your teachers speak. Look at how the everyday civic interactions are. Then you know whether you've got an educated society or not.
Have you heard our politicians speak?
I have. I think they're pretty much on a par with ours too. But and can I very quickly finally say, so we are what we teach, we are how, why we teach, and we are how we teach. Okay? And here knowledge selection and ethics dovetail with the practice of teaching. And this is not a science. I cannot say this enough times or more more loudly. It is not a science, and millions, if not billions, of pounds and dollars are going into trying to find the perfect way to teach, the perfect way to raise this level or that level. But science deals with trying to understand causation of phenomena that is determined by natural laws. Okay? So we are biologically determined beings, but we're also human beings. And the human part of our being is not determined by natural laws. So we can't be subjected to the same method of inquiry any more than if I were to try and look at a butterfly, I wouldn't try and do it by going like that because I might kill it, right? So if you apply the overzealous, narrow criteria of science to trying to understand something as complex as education, I fear you might kill the thing you're wanting to study. So I think human beings are very special, and I think educational is really special. So how we teach should be based on knowledge of subject, the substantive subject, the knowledge of the disciplinary features. Is it an interpretive subject? Is it an analytical discipline? Is it an expressive one? We need to know these things, and we can have discussions about the inner technicalities of when you teach grammar or how you teach grammar. But you have to have a sense of where that fits in the discipline as a whole and not reduce the discipline to a single technical part of it, because then you're doing that. You're killing the butterfly. And I just want to say, I suppose, finally, this is a very tall order to ask of teachers, of parents, of pupils, of politicians. But you know what? I don't know if you've got that advert in America of L'Oreal. We're worth it. Our kids are worth it. We're worth it. And I think instead of always asking how do we make education fit the society's needs or make it relevant to society or make it relevant to what the kids are interested in, we should be asking a different question. We should flip it and say, is our society fit for education? Thank you.
Thank you, and I so appreciate the transatlantic, the transnational perspective on things, because I think it helps us to better understand what's going on here, to be able to reflect upon what is happening elsewhere. So thank you, Alka. Paul, you're known for having resigned your job. We're all former educators up here. Can you tell us what sort of things were going on at your school that made you feel that you had to leave, not just in your classroom, but in the larger school culture?
Yeah, and it connects with many of the things that Chris was saying in his letter and that Alka has so eloquently said just now. What I noticed was an impoverishment of intellectual curiosity, a sort of paint-by-numbers approach to teaching in terms of, on the one hand, cherry-picking one side of things and nut picking on the other, and constructing from that a kind of a constellation which gave a narrative that became a lens through which the children knew that they were supposed to articulate their thoughts as this precondition for approval, for grades, for acceptance from the teacher. And it it became my own role as a math teacher had for a long time been, I was a sort of island separate from that in the school, and I could teach my class because math is sort of, or was till recently, the last redoubt of objectivity, in my view, sanity, logic, reason, all of these things. And most of the social justice ideologues in my school, in the administration, and my colleagues, they were scared of me. They were scared of the subject of math. But as we've seen in the last few years, again, math is in the process of falling. So my breaking point in my school was at a racially segregated Zoom meeting where during the pandemic, the students, the white identifying students, and my colleagues who were white identified, pale, I mean, their paleness was perceived by others, and so that meant they were white, and they were white passing. It's complex. But essentially, I was told by a 20-something, well-meaning young woman that objectivity was whiteness. Not just objectivity in certain domains, but objectivity in math as well. And so this was, I saw the students one after another saying that they were aligned with this and they were decrying their own racial biases and so on. And I felt that if I didn't question this, then the students would never know that not every teacher was on board with this. So I started to ask questions because I wanted the kids to see what it would look like if someone who was an adult in the room or could play that role would do that. And I was immensely gratified that it broke open the meeting and the students started to ask broader questions about the content, question the foundation of these beliefs, which were being represented as knowledge, epistemic truths. And some of my colleagues got into the act. Even the woman who was the dean of students who had arranged the meeting was supportive of my comments. And I thought we had a wonderful exchange for a couple of hours. And later I found that I had transgressed the bounds of what I should have known in my professionalism was that I had embarrassed the school, I had made students feel harmed, that there was trauma involved, that I had caused trauma to the ancestors of the students of color by questioning even the racial identity, my own racial identity. I said, if my identity as a racial being is fixed by how other people see me, well then to what extent do I have the right to define my own identity? Isn't this a question we should explore? So I was asked to recant. I was asked to show contrition, to attend a restorative justice circle where I could address and my contract was contingent on my agreement to participate. And I felt that part of me wanted to go because I felt like if I had a chance and I could stand tall in such a context, I think I might have even been able to do a good work for the people around me if I could be in the room with students and they could see how I could do that. But I also felt that if I did that, I would be complicit in the expectations. So I declined. I hemmed and hawed and I thought about it and I finally declined. And so my employment at the school ended. But I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about how could I have stayed? How could I have done it better? Is there a way that a teacher in my situation today could have worked in the margins to challenge things for the benefit of the kids? So how could I have, as an English teacher or a history teacher, been able to execute certain steps within the classroom or engage the students in a way that might have broadened their perspective in a way that would be valuable to them in the interest of the transcendental humanism, which I think you're talking about, and also the epistemic, what does it mean to have knowledge, right? And understanding what those categories are, because When you don't have those in place, you are vulnerable to people hijacking and saying things like, well, I have my knowledge, and it's just as good as your knowledge. And what's the difference between your knowledge and my knowledge? And there's indigenous knowledge, and so you fall prey to these relativisms. And I wanted to, I would like to. I keep revisiting that over and over, and I have some ideas, but I don't have any sure answer. I'd have to try them out, and I'm not a teacher anymore, so.
And I think that's such a good point, is how do we keep good teachers in the classroom? Because as I said, we don't solve this problem without teachers. We can be frustrated parents, but we're not in the classrooms, they are. Chris, I know, I want to come back to the question of objectivity, and then we want to open it up to questions shortly, but I think outside influences are a big problem in schools right now. Chris, I know you had talked about some of the outside speakers that came to your school. What was like the worst thing that you heard from some of these outside speakers?
There were a bunch of them. But the one I remember the most was because the school had enough money. They brought in, I'm sure they paid these people a lot of money for these morning assemblies. And there was an African-American woman from Princeton, a historian, who came in. And she had 40 minutes to speak in what's called a long assembly. And she kind of ran out of gas after about 30 minutes, so she just said, well, why don't I just take some questions? And there was a boy in the 10th grade section who raised his hand. And he said, I'm 16 years old, and I'm male, and I'm white. So what can I do to redeem myself? And her anger came up fast, and she pointed her finger at him, and she said, nothing.
Oh my God.
There is nothing you can do. That stain will be with you for the rest of your life. That was her answer. So that was one. There were many. But the thing I can't.
They gave you a chance to recant.
Yeah, right. They were very upset when I didn't, but they did give me a chance.
Yeah. What puzzles me so much about education, and it comes from my business background, actually. So if you start a business, and starting a business, someone described to me once, it's like jumping out of an airplane without a parachute and hoping you're going to grow feathers before you hit the ground, which I thought was a great description. But if you're starting a business, you're really aware of the competition. And the last thing that you're going to do is to you got this loan that you got to start paying down. The last thing that we were going to do is just say, well, we're kind of doing what they're doing. Let's just all do the same thing. We're going to do the same thing as they are. You're going to go out of business really fast. It seems that whole idea in education doesn't even exist.
Not in education.
And so everyone does exactly the same thing. They succumb to the same powers. They nod their heads and have the meetings they're supposed to have and address the issues that are required. And to me, and a school that I went to in high school got a new head of school, and the first big email that she sent out was just the same crap. It was just the same crap. And I wrote her, and I just said, this is so boring. And there is such an opportunity to be had here. And I have sat in on those, been required to sit in on the diversity, equity, and inclusion meetings for 8 hours. It was unbelievable. And I walked into the head of school's office and I said, I just gotten out. And I just want you to know, that was the most disgraceful waste of time of my adult life. They had these two young guys get up from Atlanta, and here were their credentials. I was raised by a single mom, and she was an activist. That was it.
Wow.
So yeah, I got a little steamed.
Well, I want to say something about the woman, the speaker you have there. It's really brief. I told you so. Earlier, I was having a conversation with someone who talked about their school having like an ally thing, and that's common in the black left. So the whole point, even if you buy into their stuff, to have affinity groups of whites and saying what you can do. I'm telling you, we don't want you to do anything, right? There's nothing you can do. Sit in the corner and be quiet. I don't know if you've seen the clip of the woman, the TikTok, whatever video of the black woman, Wakanda Forever is coming out. And she's like, what white people need to do is not go see that movie. And if you go see the movie, that is white supremacy. Oh. That movie is for us. You go sit down. Maybe we'll allow you to watch it in 6 months or so. Do not go see that movie, right? It's a weird dynamic, but that's what it is. Even when you think you're trying to give them their argument a bit and try to say, okay, let's be fair. You cannot be, back to Jason, you can't really be fair with some of that stuff. And we are going to open this up to questions and stuff. And again, I always tell Bonnie that, since I got a microphone, I'm going to start. And Chris's speech, obviously we really liked the letter that he sent. And it's sad that, there was nothing bad or evil about it. And for some reason it was, dismissed. And you weren't able to do it in front of the school, which would have been powerful. But your panel is about we are what we teach. And you all are former teachers, but, not to be disrespectful, but you're not really young. So I'm assuming that when you were taught to teach, you too, Paul, when you were taught to teach, you were taught by a different generation of teacher.
Sure.
So now these younger teachers, like Paul's colleague in his story, are being taught by different people. So what you teach is going to be dictated by what they're taught to teach. And so I go back to what Chris was saying about loving America and this kind of thing. And I think this is funny. I want you all to think about this. So we all hear and see people, these conversations about America and this, that, and the other. You say certain positive things about America, you're labeled into this box. There's this distaste for the word. Patriotism has become a bad word, right? We all hear that. But we were talking earlier and I said, some of the simple things I wish people could do is just travel the world. Because it may surprise you that I've actually traveled the world, because I'm black. Black people are oppressed. But I've actually left the country a couple times. And I don't know if you all, when you travel, if you notice it. You probably travel and you're having fun, going to the beach, you're not paying attention to this. But I, acutely notice these types of things. And everywhere I've been, the places were drenched in ferocious patriotism. Like buildings with 40-foot flags hanging from, Mexican flags hanging from the building, right? Everywhere I go, they're all patriotic. So I don't think, my point is I don't think these young people going into the education schools know this. And I think that they may not necessarily change their beliefs, but they won't think that patriotism is so bad when they find out that everyone else in the world loves their country. And regardless of the problems they have problems too. And in essence, it's unusual to hate the country you live in, right? You are the odd group, and you're the educated, the most affluent, and you hate your country. If they knew that was odd, they would probably teach different. So I'm saying, speaking to the subject of your talk, how are they going to be? They are what they teach, but they're being taught a weird way to teach, and they're coming in with a belief that they've been kind of led through K through 12. So this is what we got to work with. So what do we do about that? Except for you all going back to teach, I guess.
Well, I think you started a school, and the school that I mentioned that I went to, and I wrote as soon as I saw this first email out from the person who's now leading it. I said I think there's a super highway of opportunity in education to create a school whereby I don't care if the person is driving the Zamboni or teaching fourth year Spanish. You have absolutely no right to indoctrinate kids to your political view. You teach your class, you drive the Zamboni, you're working in the kitchen, coach your teams, that's your job. Narrow it down.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. They were over here discussing what's the Zamboni. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
So they got a hockey team, right?
It's like,
I played hockey. Okay, so sorry.
no, I'm sorry. It was just funny.
Yeah.
No, but and I hate to. I'm gonna go through some questions. I hate to be the pessimist, and I 100% agree with that. I keep saying it's approach school choice. I want all this stuff. Love carrying what all the other people are doing, but that's gonna hit a fracture. It's important. It's gonna be. And it's going to continue to grow, but we're always going to have the majority of the students not there. They're still going to be in the traditional public school, and they're still going to have to face. So that's something we need to do. But we have to have other avenues. But you're right about that. We have to, take back what we can.
Alka wants to
Oh, go ahead.
come in.
You want to talk about Zambonis? Let's go.
Yeah.
No, Bonnie just told me what one of them
Oh, okay,
is. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I think I'm certainly for opening up areas of experimentation and choice. I think that's the only way to go. I don't really have faith in the state sector, in the British state sector. I think it's going to be pretty hard to, if not impossible, to reform it from within. But I think we can't just let it be left at a kind of technical organisational level, because there is this underlying values struggle going on. So the intellectual discussion and argument for knowledge-based curriculum has to be had. You mentioned the thing about patriotism, and that if people knew that we were, that this was a minority, they wouldn't feel so bad about it. But I disagree with that, because it's precisely, this is a minoritarian elite ideology emerging here, right?
Right.
They would say, I said I had that conversation with my son about India, and I said I like the way families were looking at Nehru and Gandhi and stuff and being quite proud of it. I said, oh, I can't imagine that happening in Britain with Winston Churchill.
Right.
And he said, yeah, but Mum, but India was never an empire or a colonial country like Britain was. And they'd say the same about America. So that's a knowledge question, right? That's
true,
the knowledge
right.
thing. That's why I'm saying that argument, I don't see any way of avoiding it. I think otherwise you'll get institutional freedom, but you won't get the kind of ethical and intellectual freedom and values that we want.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting. I think you have this issue where excessive pride and excessive shame are two sides of the same coin.
Right.
They're just a way to maintain your supremacy, in a sense.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
If my country is responsible for all the world's evils, well, that gives me a real sense of power in a backhanded way, right? It's right. It's not decentering myself, so you're kind of in this constant trap where.
Yeah.
But I also think that beyond making new schools, there are opportunities, because one of the critics of legal solutions, what they will say, and I think they have a point, is that when the teacher closes the door, they kind of own the room and they can do what they want. And people say that's a bad thing. I think that's also an opportunity.
Yeah.
For example, if you have to teach a certain curriculum, say the 1619 Project or the Tulsa or what have you, you can teach that, but also add knowledge and facts around it. So you give more granularity, which can sort of substitute this paint by numbers picture with a much more nuanced picture. So, if I was teaching the Tulsa Massacre, I would also talk about how was the prosperity built in the first place? What was put in place to create that good thing? And then also, how was it rebuilt afterwards, so that you could kind of see the entrepreneurship around that, and what were the financial instruments that people used? What was the community like? Yeah. And so you can by going towards the thing, instead of saying it's all bad and we're going to teach these other things, you can go into it and bring out and highlight the facts and knowledge which is there that the kids just don't know, and because they're not being taught it. Likewise, there was the Project Veritas video recently, which was, I think, one of the best videos to illustrate the subtle ways in which the indoctrination takes place. So there's the Connecticut administrator who talks about how we don't need to tell the kids what to think. We lead them we induce it in them. And one of the ways you do that is you say, this recent Dobbs decision, this went against the majority of what people felt was the right thing to do, which was to preserve women's rights. Like, do you think it's okay for a small group of men, or mostly men, to decide, against the will of the majority? And the kids are like, well, no, I think that's bad, right? And then the conversation ends there. But you can, if you were going to be intellectually honest, you might say, well, okay, well, what about Loving versus Virginia? That was a decision that went against the majority, but we believe that that was a good decision. What's the difference there? What's the principle underlying that? And then leave it up to the kids to have that debate. So there are ways to get around it.
I think that might be the more impactful in the immediate time frame we have, to do something, because that, I mean, the school takes a lot of money, it takes time, it takes infrastructure. If you're doing pod, it's quicker, but it's still, you got to get the word out. But that, if you can convince the teachers, but again, it still goes back to what the teachers are and what they've been taught, because they tend to be, especially in K through 6 and 8, they tend to be younger, right? So they tend to be, well, I won't go there, but they tend to be younger, and so they tend to have a general belief, and so they could do that, but would they do it, which would be part of it. But, I'm still waiting for people to ask a question. So I got to say something to something you said earlier, Alka. You were talking about, I love the fact that you mentioned Baldwin. So a lot of my talks, many of you have been on the show, we talked about these things, is brass tacks. It's just solutions. What is the impact of what you're doing? Giving you your argument, you're pushing these progressive things because you claim you want to help. Is it really helping? And so one of the things I said, Ashley and I talked about this, I said the problem, and 3 of you were English teachers, so I would love your thoughts. You may correct me, but it's logic-based, so I doubt you will, is that you're pulling these books out, right, and you're replacing them. We need more authors that look like certain people. We need more transgender authors. We need more this, more that, right? And people debate about what they're writing about. But the bigger issue is, one, that people can't read. But beyond that is that it's also depriving them in a way, because regardless of how liberal you are, where you went to school, whatever, you may have been indoctrinated, but you're taught a certain way and you read certain books. So what you're doing is you're not allowing, you were talking last night about what books we read in high school, whatever, you're not allowing kids, because of racism, to read source data, right? So you can't read Socrates or Plato or Shakespeare because they're right. So you read these other people with these different views, but to be fair, all of these people are educated. So all of these people read Shakespeare and Socrates and Plato, so they get to read it, but you don't get to read it. And the problem with that is because they have an ideological spin on what they're teaching, they may be leaving some things out, right? There may be the context that Paul is talking about that is missing. So they're teaching from a framework with the knowledge of all this stuff. They know history, they know philosophy because they learned it, but they pick the parts they like. It's like picking pieces out of a Bible, right? And then they teach that, and then the kids are deprived because they're never going to go and search and see what's missing. So it's also, in a way, depriving them of a liberal education by saying, let's take all these classics out and just teach them newer stuff. Go ahead.
And they know they're missing something.
Yep.
That's the key. They come to you and they say, I always say the same thing, and they're bored because they know that if they just say if they put the right spin on it, like on a 3x5 index card, they can cherry pick the facts, and so, but they know something's missing.
Chris wanted to, we wanted to add something.
Just really quickly, I think one of the things that I would love, this has been a great couple of days for me. I'd love to know how we can enable parents, because they're the ones, to begin to, consider different ideas, a different approach. Because the parents I spent a lot of time with the kids. I love the kids, spent a lot of time with them, and then I would spend a fair bit of time with the parents as well sometimes. And I still run into them every once in a while. And I talk to them about, in some instances, these issues and what I saw. And it's always the same response. I know, but if she doesn't get into Yale,
God.
And so the parents are completely intimidated by these places because they think their child's entire life is going to be changed if they raise their voice. And that's a big hurdle to get
But not
over.
to mention what Yale's going to do to their kid when they get there. Maybe your kid doesn't need to go to Yale,
Well,
but you
exactly.
can't tell them that if they've been pushing it from K through 7. You can't tell them that at 7. It's too late at that point.